I grew up, for the most part, on a small ranch in a small community that was primarily built around agricultural and logging industry, and that was in southern Idaho, where I grew up for the most part, except for third and fourth grade, when I lived in Burns, Oregon, on a very large ranch. And I can sum up for you in 2 sentences the environment that I grew up in. Dad, I'm hurt. My dad's response, I don't see any blood, you're fine. If there was blood, that's a long way from your heart, you're fine. That's, in 2 sentences, that is the environment that I grew up in, which makes you tough. It makes you able to handle just about anything. And the other environment that I always grew up in, that was a part of my life from the very beginning, and it's an environment that is sadly missing from many, many kids' lives today. But the other environment that I grew up in was I was always a part of a church family. My dad grew up in Kentucky, and in the small community he grew up in, everybody went to church. Didn't matter if you believed in Jesus or not, you went to church, because that was the social hub of the community. If you wanted if you wanted to do anything socially, it all happened through the church, and it was the Lord's Day. Now, that's a concept. Maybe you've never heard of that concept, because in Oregon, there's not much mentality with that. The Bible says the first day of the week, that Sunday, is the Lord's Day, and in Oregon, kind of the mentality is it's almost anything but the Lord's Day. But that's not the environment my dad grew up in. It was the Lord's Day. That means businesses were closed. Everybody went to church. So when he and his mom moved to Idaho when he was 17 years old, they immediately found a new church to go to in Idaho, and they attended that church. Now, my dad met my mom, who also attended church, a different church. They didn't go to the same church. They got married, they had me, and then they decided on a new church together that they would attend now that they were married. So I was a part of a church family from the very moment, the very beginning of my life. And both my parents love the Lord. My mom has passed away, and they shared their faith with me. And when I was 13 years old, I was reading a Bible devotional book that led me to make a personal decision for myself to follow Jesus. And on Easter Sunday of that year, of my 13th year of life, I was baptized into Jesus. And by the way, we do have a baptism, I'd say Sunday, but we have a Saturday service. So we have a baptism weekend coming up on Easter weekend. If you'd like to be baptized into Jesus, just mark that under your next steps and we'll be in touch with you. Mark that on the back of your connection card. I was kind of rebellious once I got into high school. I was a good kid, but not a good kid. Kind of weird. I am kind of weird that way. So, but I still believed in Jesus. I just wasn't letting Jesus be Lord of my entire life, however. And after high school, I planned on being a fish and game officer. My grandfather had a friend who was a retired fish and game officer, and I spent some time with him. And he told me all about, here's the schooling you need to get, and here's how you get a job there. And he showed me his 9-shot revolver, and I'm like, cool, I didn't know there was a 9-shot revolver. And so it was really cool. And I'm an introvert. Now, because of what I do, people think I'm an extrovert, but I'm not. So, working outdoors, working in the woods, I'm like, man, that's a career for me. That's my kind of career. And then Jesus had different plans. Being a pastor was not on my radar at all. I finished up my second year of college, and I was still kind of a wild child. But I felt God stirring something inside of me, something I'd never felt before. And God was calling me, or God was directing me to be a pastor. And I thought, this is really weird, and this is really crazy, but okay. I said, I'm going to be obedient. Okay, God, I'm going to obey you. So if you ever feel God calling you, be obedient to that. And I obeyed his voice, and I immediately got hired as a summer youth pastor in Orville, California. I came back when that summer was over, came back to finish my schooling in Idaho, and I immediately got hired as a part-time associate pastor near the school I went to so I could work there until I graduated. Upon graduating, I got a full-time associate pastor job, and I worked with three great men, three great lead pastors in a row. Bob Wood was one of them, who was here last week, right? Bob Wood was one of them who was here last week. His dad was another one. And Dewey Arnold, who grew up in the Sweet Home area, was from the Sweet Home area. Those guys were great. And then I worked with two really horrible ones. I mean, so bad that I quit. I questioned my calling. I questioned my faith. I didn't really want to have anything to do with church or with Jesus or with God. Nothing. Now, I look back on it, and I kind of chuckle now, because during this time when I'm questioning my faith and all this is going on, I had remembered quite vividly being a junior in high school and driving down Substation Road, and it was at nighttime, and I was talking to Jesus. I was praying. And Jesus had made this impression on me, hey, someday you're going to have your own business. Okay, really? And so that seed that had been germinating from high school blossomed. So when I resigned as being the pastor of evangelism at the church I was at, I opened up my own business. And I had that for several years. Very successful business. I just got bored. So I sold it. And I did some other stuff. And I rarely, during this time period, had anything to do with church. I wasn't the best me either. But I'm really thankful for a couple things. I'm really grateful for two things. But because during this time of wandering away from Jesus, he never left me. And I'm grateful for that. And I'm grateful my wife, Jennifer, never left me either. Because she could have, but she didn't. So I'm thankful for both of those things. And God just began to gently draw me back to himself. I was driving past the old sawmill in the town I grew up in, and God spoke to my heart quite clearly. He said, I've never rescinded my call on your life to be a pastor. The flood of emotion just almost nearly overwhelmed me, and I was baptized into Jesus again because I needed to be. And I found myself back in Oregon, not in Burns this time, but here in Hawley. Now, that's a real brief version of my story. I left out a lot of details, a lot of the pain I didn't share. But my story is a story that can help others. In fact, my story has helped many find Jesus again, just like I found Jesus again, even if you didn't know my story, even if I never told it to you, because you can feel it. You can sense it from me. My story has helped other people find Jesus for the very first time. And your story can do the same thing. Every follower of Jesus, every Christian has a story to share. And this series, Ignite, is for Christians. I mean, if you're not a Christian, I'm glad you're here, and you can kind of see an inner working of what being a Christian is meant to be. But this series is for Christians, and every Christian has a story to share. Some of you, your story is going to be similar to mine. For others, you're going to have a story that, man, I always had a close relationship with the Lord. That's going to be your story, and that's a great story. Others are going to have variations of this. Some of you are going to have a story that's just, it's your story. It's out there, but it's your story. Regardless of what your story is, your story has the potential to change a life. Your story has the potential to change lives. This series, Ignite, is all about your story. How your story can make a difference. How your story can ignite faith in others. And today I want you to think about your story. I want you to learn how to tell your story. And I want you to use your story to help ignite faith in others around you. Those you work with. Those you go to school with. Although right now we're limiting all that, but those you work with, those you go to school with, those you volunteer with, those you interact with. And this series is strategically placed here on March 15th because it's leading up to Easter weekend. That's why I also think this whole physical situation with the virus is also a spiritual battle. Because it's Easter time. And the devil would love nothing more than to distract everyone from Jesus' resurrection to life. Amen? That's what he would love to do. And so, this series is strategically placed here because I'm excited about Easter, but I'm excited about today because your story can influence the lives of others to learn about Jesus. The Apostle John writes about a man who comes into contact with Jesus, meets Jesus, and then, well, let's just read his story. Here's what happens. John chapter 9, verses 1 through 9. As Jesus was walking along, he saw a man who had been blind from birth. Teacher, his disciples asked him, why was this man born blind? Was it because of his own sins or his parents' sins? It was not because of his sins or his parents' sins, Jesus answered. This happened so the power of God could be seen in him. We must quickly carry out the tasks assigned by us by the one who sent us. The night is coming, and then no one can work. But while I am here in the world, I am the light of the world. Then he spit on the ground, made mud with the saliva. Jesus must not have heard about this coronavirus thing. Then he spit on the ground, made mud with the saliva, and spread the mud over the blind man's eyes. He told him, go wash yourself in the pool of Siloam. Siloam means sent. So the man went and washed and came back seeing. His neighbors and others who knew him as a blind beggar asked each other, isn't this the man who used to sit and beg? Some said he was, and others said, no, he just looks like him. But the beggar kept saying, yes, I am the same one. Now imagine this, get a grip on it. You know this guy for years as being this blind beggar, and all of a sudden he's showing up and he can see. Were you faking the whole time just so you didn't have to get a job? You know? And then others were like, no, it just looks like him, but it can't possibly be him because the guy I know has been blind since birth. And he just keeps saying, it's me. It's really me. The story continues. John chapter 9, verses 10 through 11. They, that's his friend, that's his neighbors, that's the people who knew him. They asked, who healed you? What happened? He told them. The man they called Jesus made mud and spread it over my eyes and told me, go to the pool of Siloam and wash yourself. So I went and washed, and now I can see. Now, in the next few verses, the man's story really picks up. It's getting spread everywhere. His parents are like super excited. They're thrilled. Our son can see. And his friends are astonished and they're amazed, and some of them still don't believe it's him. And then there are others who are really ticked off that this man can now see. They're actually upset that a blind man can see. They're upset over him being healed. Or perhaps it's moreover who healed him. You see, in the middle of all this is Jesus, the great healer, the great physician. Jesus, by healing this man, he's stirring up all sorts of controversy. He's stirring up all sorts of animosity among a certain group of people. Now, to be fair, a few of this group say, well, no, Jesus has to be a good guy, otherwise he wouldn't be able to heal people. But most of them are saying, well, he isn't from God because he healed this man on the wrong day of the week. What do they mean by that, the wrong day of the week? Well, Jesus healed this man on a day that was supposed to be dedicated to rest. And they say, well, Jesus, by healing, you were working when you should have been laying back and taking it easy. And so because of this, they say Jesus is a sinner. That's their train of thought. You have to get, that's the train of thought they have. Now, I personally will be thrilled if I saw a blind person who can now see. And I'm sure that most of you, hopefully all of you, would be thrilled if a blind person you knew could see, yet there are always people. There's nothing new under the sun. There's always people who aren't happy when something good takes place. So you need to be careful. You need to be aware that that sort of person exists. Because that sort of person isn't healthy for you. Oh yeah, they might want to hang out with you because they want to exploit and they want to feed off your misery. That's really what they want. Now, this man's story, the people that it upset were a group of men known as the Pharisees. And they were religious leaders. They knew a lot about the Bible. These guys call Jesus a sinner. They call him a liar. They're the ones who will eventually, this time of year, I always find it interesting. Well, the Romans killed Jesus. Well, yeah, the Romans were the ones that crucified him because they had the authority. But these guys, these are the guys who actually make sure Jesus is eventually crucified. And the Pharisees, they keep badgering this guy who's been healed. They just keep at him, keep at him. They meet with him once. They don't like what they hear, so they meet with him again. Here's the second time they're meeting with him. John chapter 9, verses 24 through 27. So for the second time, they called in the man who had been blind and told him, God should get the glory for this because we know this man Jesus is a sinner. I don't know whether he is a sinner, the man replied, but I know this, I was blind and now I can see. Underline that in your notes. I was blind and now I can see. But what did he do, they asked. How did he heal you? Look, the man exclaimed, I told you once, didn't you listen? Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples too? Oh my gosh, that ticked them off. That riled them up so much. They keep badgering him, and he just keeps telling his story. Look, this is my story. Here's my story. He tells them over and over again until finally they get so mad they kick him out of the synagogue. Now, we don't have really anything in our culture that's entirely like, I guess, this quarantine thing is sort of, but entirely like that. I mean, you know, it could be like, hey, you're trespassed off Holly Church property. You can't ever step foot on the property here. And then notch it up about 10 times. And that's what being kicked out of the synagogue was like for this guy, culturally, socially, all of that. Then so that's what they do to him finally, because he won't change his story. Then here's what happens. John chapter 9, 35 through 38. When Jesus heard what had happened, he found the man and asked, do you believe in the Son of Man? Now, Son of Man is a term for Jesus. He's the Son of Man, he's the Son of God. He's not one or the other, he's both. He's fully human, fully God. So he's the Son of God, he's the Son of Man. So he says, do you believe in the Son of Man? The man answered, who is he, sir? I want to believe in him. You have seen him, Jesus said, and he is speaking to you. Yes, Lord, I believe, the man said, and he worshiped Jesus. Isn't this a great story? Jesus changes this man's life. He shares his story. And did you notice that some people believed him and some people don't believe him? But here's what this story shows us. This is what I was, and this is what I am now. And the difference is Jesus. Respond however you want to my story, but this is what I was, and this is what I am now, and the difference is Jesus. You know what else this story shows us? You don't have to know much about the Bible to tell your story. You don't have to know much about spiritual things to share your story. This guy didn't know much about Jesus. He didn't know everything there was to know about Jesus. He just told his story. I was blind, but now I can see. I was lost, but now I'm found. I was walking in darkness, but now I walk in light. I was living without hope, but now I have hope. I didn't feel love, but now I feel love. I was blind, but now I can see. And it's no different for you. You just tell your story about how Jesus has changed your life, how Jesus has affected your life. This is who I was before me knowing Jesus. This is who I am now, and the difference is Jesus. If you are a follower of Jesus, you have a story to tell. And when you tell your story, that ignites faith in the lives of others. It ignites faith in the lives of people around you. The Apostle Peter tells us in 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 15 and 16, he says, if you are asked about your Christian hope, always be ready to explain it. but you must do this in a gentle and respectful way. There's really no more gentle and respectful way to talk about your hope in Jesus than sharing your story. Some people call it your testimony. You don't have to be a preacher to share your story. You don't have to go up to somebody and take your biggest Bible and hit them over the head with it to share your story. You don't have to wow them with all your knowledge about Jesus to share your story. You just share your story, and people can relate to that. And I want to help you be able to write your story. So if you haven't done so already, find your message notes, and you'll see this, how to write your story. Your message notes are inside your program. When writing your story, be concise and don't use fancy words. You might even want to say your story out loud. As you speak it, just write it down or type it out as you speak it. Be direct and to the point. There's no reason to be overly wordy and try to add a bunch to it, because telling your story in 3 minutes is ideal. My story I shared this morning was a little bit long. It was like 4 to 5 minutes, so it was a little bit longer than 3 minutes. Why is 3 minutes ideal? Because you'll be able to share, if you get it down in 3 minutes, you'll be able to share your story in almost any and every situation. In almost any and every situation, you'll have 3 minutes and you can share your story. Things to consider when writing your story. What was my life like before knowing Jesus? What substitute or substitutes, what substitute for Jesus did I use to find meaning in my life? How did God get my attention? When did I receive Jesus as my Savior and Lord? How has Jesus changed my life? What benefits have I experienced or felt? So each week we have different next steps on the back of your connection card. They're also on your message notes down there. And here's your biggest spiritual next step you can take this week. Write your story today. And after you do that, I'd love for you to email me your story. My personal email's there on your message notes. I'd love for you to email me your story. Write it today. Why do I say write it today? Because if you don't do it today, or if you're watching online, whenever you see this, but if you don't do it today, it's probably you won't do it. So write it out today. Write your story today and then email it to me. Your story can ignite faith in others. It can ignite faith in me. Write your story today as an act of worship, because somebody out there really needs to hear your story. And then you need to do something really important. It's this. You need to ask Jesus to use your story. So let's do that right now. Would you bow your heads and close your eyes and pray these words silently as I pray them out loud? Jesus, thank you for changing me. Thank you for changing the direction of my life. Use my story to help someone else know and be changed by you. In your name I pray.